to Why Don't Date These Guys. I'm Naomi Guy.
I'm Joel Guy. I'm stuck in a computer today.
And we are joined today by Lindsay Luv.
I should note, sort of as a wind up to Lindsay, we made this connection because we reached out to Julie Gunnigal many moons ago, asking if she'd be interested in appearing on our show. And recently, one of her either assistants or like strategists for the Julie Gunnigal campaign reached out to us and proposed a new podcast guest that aligned very closely with what we do here. She said, I have, quote, another friend who is amazing, entertaining, super fun, and brilliant. She's a therapist who lives here in the Valley, focusing on relationships, identity, self-love. And she finally mentioned that she had some time to do podcasts and public speaking engagements. And we thought, wow, what an awesome opportunity. So Lindsay, you have a lot to live up to.
Yes, apparently. Apparently.
So, Lindsay, I have to ask, if you would like to give a brief intro on yourself. I'll ask some leading questions and you can just walk right into it. Who are you and what is your background?
So my name is Lindsay Luv. I am a licensed clinical social worker and I have my own practice in the Valley, Therapy Luv, all one word, and love is spelled L-U-V. And I opened my practice while I was actually sitting on the school board for Chandler Unified, which I was on that board until like December was my last meeting. So technically like last year for 4 years. And I had worked in behavioral health for about 10 years at that point, as a therapist, clinical manager, all around in all of the community behavioral health agencies. And I really recognized that there was a blind spot when it came to working with historically marginalized communities, communities of color, LGBTQ communities, and those behavioral health agencies weren't really serving those populations, and these are the populations who need the most healing. So I opened up my practice as like a mighty team of one, and now we've become a team of 4 in the past couple years, going on our second year open. So
it's interesting that you mentioned that because we just did a 2-parter. Was it a 2-parter or a 3-parter, Naomi, on Dr. Phil's awful dating book? And one of the things we talked about kind of as a wind up to discussing Dr. Phil was the idea that there just really isn't good mental health anything in this country. So regardless of like how good of a job Dr. Phil does at, popularizing mental health strategies, unfortunately, he's like one of the few resources that a lot of people have. So, it's really cool that you're both filling this niche of, appealing to communities that don't normally have access to those sorts of services, especially because I don't think Dr. Phil has ever done a particularly good job outreaching to them.
No, and I think that he does not represent the field well. Now, we do have some people in the field who do some harmful things, and we know that psychology has been harmful for a lot of historically marginalized groups. A lot of our prevailing theorists don't look like me, right? Like it was pretty much very conservative, wealthy white men. And, we get shocked when these don't work across the board for everyone. And our field has a tendency to blame our clients as opposed to really looking at our theories and how our theories just aren't serving certain populations. With Therapy Luv, I bring in like other theorists and other ideologies. I'm an EMDR certified therapist too, which means I do a specific trauma modality. And I work on like racialized trauma, sexualized trauma, all the things that I think that our prevailing theorists really didn't have a lens to, develop sound therapeutic strategies for. And I think that my clients are better for it. And there are a lot of therapists out there who are doing some similar work. And we're hoping to kind of like take over the field and like take over Dr. Phil's spot.
Well, he is retiring. We did a 3-part, just, hammering home how bad his advice was. And then after we released the 3rd part, 2 days later, they announced his show wasn't getting renewed. So clearly the people at top are influenced by the work we're doing here. I'm fascinated by the work you're doing because the question I've kind of had in recent years is a lot of therapy at least like popular conceptions of it seemingly indicates there's a problem inside someone, and like we're going to work through it, and we're going to, strategize and give you like coping skills in order to address it. But in many cases, there are problems that bother people's mental health that are external to them. And like, it's, I don't know, just systemic racism, it's climate change and all of like the horrifying effects it's going to have on people's future. It's the fact that no one has the economic resources to, sort of pull themselves out of the situations that they're in. So I have to wonder, are those kind of the topics that come up as you're talking with people in these communities?
Oh, all the time, right? Like we get a lot of young activists too who are realizing and doing the work that it's a continuous cycle of trauma, right? Like they're never going to walk out of the house and racism is going to be solved or climate change is going to be solved like, by what we do, right? And a lot of the work that I do, I use something called an adaptive information processing approach, right? So it just kind of like forces us to be curious about where we develop like certain behaviors, right? And a lot of our behaviors are developed out of survival, right? So when I'm working with historically marginalized people, one of the things that I tell them is that we're walking around in a constant state of crisis, which doesn't do us well, right? Like it impacts our immune functioning, right? It leads to some chronic physical health issues that, that's where a lot of our clients come from, right? Is like doctors' offices, because doctors are seeing some problems that are coming about health-wise, but they don't really have a standard diagnosis for it. They just kind of write it off as like, that's psychology, send them to a therapist, right? But what we do is we work on grounding and stabilization, right? Helping people to feel like they have more control within their bodies, while they are not going to have as much control in terms of like ending racism or ending these like systemic problems that they encounter. We can show them like how to regulate themselves in situations, how to find safety within themselves, where to find safety within their community, and getting to some roots, right? Because people come in for one thing, and I like to refer to it as like, we unlock the trauma under the trauma, right? So they might come in because they've seen a video of an unarmed Black person being murdered, right? But as we're talking, they're talking about like violence that they've experienced underneath that from childhood. They're talking about being invalidated in a lot of ways too. They're talking about like insecure attachments and how that's impacted their current relationships and functioning. And it's really eye-opening for them. And they feel better having this knowledge of like them and like all of the parts that exist within them too.
I really love that. The biggest thing that like you hear when you're working in fields that, especially healthcare, is like passion fatigue. And I see that all the time. I'm in healthcare currently. I literally just started like 2 months ago. And I feel like the biggest thing that is an issue is the fact that like we have patients that come in that seek care, and we go home after treating patients that either we have been affected by similar trauma to them or something of that nature. They pull at our heartstrings, and we go home and we can't just shake that off. Like it's not something that we can just let go of and decompress from. And I think that's very similar, like people that are at protests all the time, the advocates for the BLM movement, or the all those people that showed up to the Roe v. Wade protests. Like there is such a thing as too much passion. Like there's too much passion in you, and if you don't see results right away, you're going to just you're going to walk away from it because you aren't seeing the results that you would like to see. So I really, really, really appreciate everything that you're doing, because I think that there needs to be someone out there that completely understands these things. And the vast majority of time you see a therapist because, it's not the best fit, but because there's such a shortage of therapists, you go in and you see a therapist and they have no idea what you're talking about. They're like, what is the BLM movement? You know what I mean? So
yeah, I'm laughing because a lot of the times I'm usually people's second or third therapist in their lifetime. And they get surprised. They're like, what, you're not going to play devil's advocate with me when I'm talking about like like sexism or misogyny or racism. No, like we have these conversations and how these systemic things impact their lives, right? Like at the most basic level. And there's a lot of validation too. And we work on language, right? Because one of the things that oppressors have done really well is being restrictive of language, right? And so a lot of my folks who are experiencing trauma, when you don't have the language to even explain or express what's happening to you, it makes it even more difficult to unlock it. And a lot of my folks, like their trauma started in early childhood before they even had language, right? So a lot of my clients are learning words like microaggressions, right? And being able to say like, yeah, that's it. Like that's what's happening to me, which makes them feel empowered that they're able to say like, you know, yeah, like this is BS what's happening at work. Like I'm tired of coming into work and after, you know, seeing somebody murdered by the police, my boss is wanting me to do a racialized trauma or equity training for the whole staff. You know, so I love it. I love the work that we do. And I love it when my clients come to a certain self-awareness about what's happening for them.
Tying that a little bit back to some of the themes we've discussed on our podcast, one of the major trends in America over the last few years has been more and more women are deliberately being single. And you can look at the like statistics and surveys and break down different reasons. You know, they say some of it's economic, some of it is they don't feel they can find a partner, some of it is they don't feel it's like a good time in their life. But a big trend seems to be more women are aware of like what constitutes abusive behavior or what constitutes like pulling your share in a relationship, and are less willing to settle for partners who don't offer the same amount of support and love and affection and, you know, even basic stuff like household chores around the house. And I'm wondering if that's a theme that comes up at all in your work, because I think for the most part, you know, the women making this choice are very happy in singlehood because they're like, I was doing additional work when I was with another person. It is unlikely I'll find someone who's able to, you know, provide me the same level of support and affection as I can provide myself.
This does come up. I am happily single by choice myself. And I think that, yeah, like it still happens where I talk to women who have been in relationships for years and years, and we start to break down like the relationship between them and their partner, and they come to this epiphany like, holy shit, I'm in an abusive relationship right now. Like, you know, what do I do? And realizing that they want more. And then like the fatigue in figuring out like, you know, I'm not really finding more, right? Especially after talking to friends like me who are out in the dating world and recognizing that something is just going on. Online dating is the preferred way that people date right now, right? Like that's been the way that it's been for at least like 10 years at this point, probably more. And I like online dating is just a very awkward experience because you almost have to like uncrack these codes, right? Like, so you get these profiles of these people who are like no games, and that, you know, automatically is like, this person is really into games and really into fucking around, and I'm not going to find out. So
backgammon, Parcheesi, Scrabble,
yeah. Yeah. So like, you know, women, and I think men too, for the large part, and, you know, also non-binary people, we don't include like, you know, everybody in this conversation, but I think there's a fatigue in dating right now because, you know, it's kind of like that Miley song, like I can buy myself flowers, take myself dancing, hold my own hand, not have to put up with the amount of bullshit that I would put up with dating right now. I've had a lot of women who are like, you know, how can I like switch to dating other women? Like that's been like the biggest topic that has come up, is like people are just kind of like switching the dating profile over to seeking women, right? And going out on dates with the ladies. Lady dates is what they're calling them, right? and seeing if they can have more meaningful relationships that way. I think that, a lot of the times, like, it's just people are seeking more intimacy and they're not finding that, right? And so they're reinvesting in themselves, or they're reinvesting in their own friendships, and they're trying to figure out how they can create more intimacy without a partner.
I saw a TikTok recently of this woman that was she was asked a lot because she had gotten divorced after like 15, 20 years of marriage, and they had 5 kids together. And everyone kept asking her, like, well, your marriage looked fine from the outside. Like, why did you get divorced? And she said, it's the same amount of work if I'm with him or without him. Like, I'm taking care of the kids all by myself. I'm still working 40 hours a week by myself. Like, I can support myself on my own. And I needed someone to take care of me as I took care of them. And he wasn't willing to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's definitely a theme that comes through, right? In terms of feeling like you're giving so much to your relationships and you're not getting anything back in return, right? And especially if you're playing multiple roles, right? Like your wife, your mother, and then you also have to work a job like in between, right? Like that whole notion of like a second shift. I think that people are feeling physically and emotionally drained, and they're kind of ready for like to put the brakes on things, especially if we got like dudes on TikTok who are like declaring that they're not like washing their like ass or like using soap. And it's like, you see like these women who they're dating who are like horrified, and it's like, break up with him. So gross. Like, what are we doing? And it feels like, for women, we feel like we put in a whole lot of work into these relationships, and then we get a guy that doesn't like wash the dingleberries from around their butthole. And it's like, why?
I love the terminology that you use. No,
Yeah,
I was talking about this earlier this week. I'm in sexual health, and so I was talking about this in a meeting this week. This woman was like, yeah, a lot of we were talking about like cultural competency, and she says that a lot of like the Latinx community come to her and want to seek treatment. They're like, well, don't tell my family that I'm like seeking treatment for you because I have like a bacterial infection in my vagina. And she's like, oh, well, don't worry about it. Like, that can be a number of things. Like, it could be the soap or anything. And she came to the conclusion that the vast majority of the time is because in the Latinx community, there's not a lot of circumcision that goes on, and no one teaches those individuals with penises that they need to actually be washing everything very thoroughly in order to not be giving people with vaginas bacterial infection and things of that nature. And so they're like, oh, well, and they just automatically chalk up this like bacterial infection to, oh, that person with a vagina is being a whore. Like, that person obviously is not being faithful to her husband.
It's like, no, that person is dealing with a husband who is just perfectly fine to walk around with a dirty dick and like, without like, abandon or without like judgment. And, I know that unconditional love is a thing, but, I feel like if you love me, like, wash your penis.
That's the episode title. There we got it.
Like, we don't need all of that around here, right? Especially if we're talking about like, women and reproductive health, right? Like, there's already a lack of investment in our reproductive health, right? It's actively being attacked. And, you have women who are walking around carrying so much shame because nobody talked to them about like, how to, have healthy relationships, right? Or that, hey, it's like, okay to ask your partner to wear a condom. And if he does not, it is okay to like dip out, right? So it's just, there's a lot. And like the things that I hear, I'm like, oh my God, like, I just want to give these women a hug.
I think one topic we've discussed a couple of times when we've been working our way through different self-help books on dating published in the 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s, is there's this recurring theme that the authors of these self-help books, who have been all men, shockingly enough, put in sections where they explicitly say women cannot expect their husbands to change. And they're like, look, as much as you want them to change, like men are resilient. Men, take offense when you tell them they're doing things wrong. Ladies, like you can nudge them in the right direction, but ultimately you cannot change your husband's behavior and you shouldn't expect that he will in this relationship. And, I think part of it is people are less likely these days to have read said self-help books than prior generations might have. But like simultaneously, I think you have social media out there where people can share their experiences and frustrations and not have to, go to these volumes, these tomes from alleged health professionals to get this information. It's much more accessible where you can go and complain in public forums on forums like TikTok or Facebook or Instagram, whatever.
Oh yeah, I mean, there was a guy who wrote an article for Psychology Today. It was sometime last year, like not too long ago, like probably like around the middle of the year, where he talked about women are choosing to be single because men need to work on communication and they need therapy. And he breaks this down in terms of like, hey guys, like we can no longer enter these relationships expecting women to take care of us and not communicating things and putting the brunt onto her when we haven't learned to be emotionally vulnerable ourselves. That's not true intimacy when we haven't like created that vulnerability for ourselves and our communication signals are a bit fuzzy, right? There was a lot of pushback from like other men about that, but a lot of women who were like, yeah, that's exactly why I'm not single, right? Because the communication just is not there, and communication and intimacy are like top two of the things that people come into therapy to discuss with regards to their relationship.
I think that the vast majority of the heterosexual relationships that I'm seeing recently, the women that are talking to me are saying like, I feel like I don't need to be teaching my partner how to communicate properly. That's not my job. I shouldn't be sitting here saying like, oh, this is how you don't yell when you're aggravated. You take a breath. And I think that's the biggest thing. Is there, like you mentioned that those are the two like biggest things. Are those like some of the most common mistakes that you're seeing couples making?
Yeah, it does come down to like those are definitely the common themes, like that intimacy and like lack thereof in communication. It's really interesting when they're both combined, right? Like we've survived a global pandemic, right? And then you throw into that couples who've been together for years. They maybe have had children, they've had other like major life transitions. And it usually starts with one partner being upset because sex isn't occurring the way it was when both people in the relationship were younger and had less responsibilities, right? And you have this other partner who's feeling like that's not fair or realistic because I'm tired, right? Like I don't have the energy all the time to just be like doing it like rabbits, like around the corner when the kids are watching Aladdin, right? And I need more intimacy, right? Like I need communication. So that's one thing. And then the other thing too is like, sexual preferences change throughout the relationship too. And you have a partner who is scared to communicate to their partner that they have a sexual preference for something or they want to try something a little kinky in the bedroom, but feeling like there might be shame. And there probably is shame in that because their partner may not have bargained for that. I usually, because I'm not a sex therapist, so I usually will work with one of the partners individually and refer them to a sex therapist, like particularly like an ASECT certified therapist, so they can work on different themes like infidelity recovery, right? Like exploring like kinks, right? Exploring that communication around like when sex is supposed to occur. A lot of couples feel that if they have to schedule sex, it's not romantic, right? But we're in different times, right? And there are different priorities, right? And you have different needs. And so I think working with like an AASECT certified therapist or a licensed marriage and family therapist, that's the key for a lot of the couples or the folks that I see, and really just like reimagining like what their partnership will look like in this next phase.
It's interesting that we're discussing all of this and like people's preferences, because one thing that I wanted to talk about on this podcast was a survey I just saw recently from the American Survey Center. And so basically every year they go around and they interview 5,000 American adults ages 18 and above. And this year they interviewed 5,000 American adults, 800 of whom were single. And so they got a lot of like really solid substantive data about like the different reasons that people aren't dating. And it confirms exactly what you're talking about, that people are more likely to be single these days. And a lot of it comes down to dating expectations. So more than 1 in 4 single Americans say that a major reason they're not dating is that they simply enjoy being single. 1 in 5 single Americans say that people not being interested in them is a major factor. Some of it's related to previous relationships, but a lot of it comes down to dating expectations. And they give a lot of examples of people looking for mutual respect in relationships and say that the other individuals they've tried to date aren't open-minded. Some of them say, they expect certain basic things to be done, like say washing private parts. And it's not a consistent thing that the partners they're meeting on dating apps are good. But then they also break down like different things that make them more or less likely to be attracted to an individual. And there's a lot of like really big divides, such as, whether or not someone wants children, whether or not they live in another state, whether or not they're a Republican or a Trump supporter, whether or not they're significantly taller. And yeah, it's just really, really solid data. And I'll put a link to it. I put one in the chat. I'll put one in the link to the podcast description as well, because this is not, I think, sort of anecdotal experiences from a handful of people. This is like a very common thing around the United States. People are dissatisfied with dating. Clearly, dating apps and dating culture have not evolved in a way to make relationships stronger or better.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, like for women, particularly on dating apps are not always safe, right? Especially like I think Bumble now allows you to put that preference in if you want to date a partner who's been vaccinated or unvaccinated, or wears a mask versus doesn't wear a mask, right? And a lot of women who choose like or say like, I'm vaccinated, I'd rather meet with a partner who is vaccinated and willing to wear masks in certain situations. They get a lot of harassment online. That and like if they have like Black Lives Matter, like any kind of like Black Lives Matter like memorabilia in their profile photo, or they are pro-abortion or pro-Biden or a Democrat, they get a lot of like threats and harassment online, which make them less willing to engage, right? Because when you get so many messages calling you a bitch or a POS or whatnot, or threats to their lives, it makes them feel like they can't trust in a dating situation, right? And they're less willing to meet up with people because they're wondering, is this a trap? Am I going to show up and this person is going to be threatening to me in some ways, right? I've worked with a lot of clients who've experienced some like very brutal sexual assault from dating encounters online, right? And it's hard to tell them to get back out there when they go into these dating environments that are just so aggressive and threatening too. So they would rather be single because it's a matter of safety, like physical and emotional safety at that point. Which definitely gets in the way of dating. Dating is not fun.
Well, it's
anymore.
It's frustrating because to my knowledge, there's no dating app that actually like scans the databases of people who are signed up to confirm they aren't sex offenders. Like they say in the, terms of service, oh, don't use this if you're a sex offender, which is a very low bar and, pretty easy to ignore if you're trying to get on that platform. It's like, Uber for many years would hire drivers and not bother to check if they had any like criminal history or sexual misconduct. And then eventually, after a series of lawsuits, they launched a program where they would verify whether or not someone was a sex offender. But rather than paying for it themselves, they just tacked on like an extra $1 per charge to cover that. And it fascinates me because you'd think dating apps obviously benefit from having like a huge pool of people to like filter through. Like the big value proposition is this is the place everyone gathers who's single and interested. And if you want to find a partner, Bumble, Tinder, Hinge, Grindr, these are the places to, go and hook up or, find a long-term relationship. But I don't necessarily think that's what people are looking for. Like people are looking more for quality partners than they are for a lot of people to filter through. And the idea that none of them can have this value proposition that's just, hey, everyone on this platform isn't going to murder you is mind-boggling. You'd think that'd be something that everyone would be proud of.
Yeah, and it's like, so I watch a lot of true crime.
Oh, no.
As many therapists do. That is actually one of probably my dating, like things that inhibit me from dating, because I'm always like, is he a serial killer? But, I was watching something the other day where I think it was a high profile case where this guy was on a dating show, right? And he had this history of like domestic violence. And he was one of the contestants who I guess the woman in the dating show didn't end up choosing. But like months later, he ended up getting married and murdering his partner and putting her body in like a dumpster, right? These are the things that stand out for us as women in dating situations. And I've definitely encountered a lot of men who, there are a lot of women who will give like, instead of their regular number, they prefer to communicate through the app or a Google Voice or Google Chat to safety, right? And you have a lot of guys who get aggressively angry and feel like you're playing games and, that you're not a worthy partner because you're not vulnerable enough to them to give them your number. But I don't think that men or people realize that, dating does carry a certain level of risk, like saying yes to a date, giving your phone number out to a person. Like I've definitely been harassed by guys online, and I'm like, this was before iPhones would let you block people. And I'm like, how do I get this guy to stop texting me at 2 a.m, threatening messages, right? But those are the risks that we kind of assume in dating. So like, if we make it to the date, right, like, that is a risk, right? In terms of like, I'm always checking like, oh, we want to go to that restaurant. Does that restaurant have good parking? Is it well lit? And this feels unrealistic to men. And it feels like, oh, she's flaky and she's playing games. I'm like, no, I'm trying to stay alive. I'm trying to, minimize my risk towards sexual assault or whatever, because the stakes are kind of high.
And no matter how many times you explain to a man that this is the reason why you aren't going on a date with them, they, no matter what, will not change their ways, in the sense of like, they won't do more research. They won't try to be more accommodating. They'll just say, oh, you're a bitch, and like block you or like move on. And it's like, it just re-shows you why you don't want to get involved with that individual. I would like to bring up something that I've been genuinely curious about. You've been mentioning like some of your you've been mentioning here and there like little bits of your dating history. And I've always been told that doctors are the worst patients. So as a therapist, what is your dating life look like right now? Like you mentioned you're happily single, but like how's your dating life been affected by your occupation?
Well, I think that before I was elected to school board, I was on the apps, and I am on the apps now that I'm not on the school board. But I never wanted to put that I was a therapist or social worker or worked for a nonprofit in my dating profile, because automatically people would assume that I was diagnosing them on dates. And I am. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not diagnosing people on dates. And I think therapists have a completely different relationship with like diagnoses than most people think. We're not constantly consumed by it. But it was, a lot of people, a lot of guys that I would go out with, they would immediately tell me too much too soon. And that was just unattractive to me, which I get that's probably something that I need to work on, because being a mental health therapist in the field, people, come up to you and they want to share with you, and you might be the first person that people have like shared with, right? But I need a little bit of mystery too, and that understanding that I'm not coming to you to offer you therapy services, right? I'm coming to you to look for partnerships, right? So that has been like the biggest challenge. And I think too, like, I'm on dating apps now. I think that communication in dating apps has really changed since before I was elected to now after. And I don't know if that's like a symptom of like the pandemic. But you have a lot of guys who are like upset with you because you don't want to go on a first date to their house to, eat a gourmet meal. And it's like, no, like that's not safe, dude. And they're like, well, you said that you were afraid of COVID, so you could come to my house. I'm not a serial killer. As if serial killers just like announce themselves when they like walk into the room. So it's really different and difficult to find out or figure out. I think trust is always going to be an issue too for trauma therapists, because it's really hard hearing about like your client's dating nightmare that led to harm, and then you've got to go out and meet somebody for drinks that you don't know. So it's just, dating as a therapist, cannot recommend. Still trying to figure that out.
We've discussed like 2023 and like post-COVID dating trends on different episodes. And one of the big things seems to be post federal declarations of COVID being over, a lot of people are doing video chats rather than first dates. So rather than, messaging back and forth and setting up coffee, they're first having, some kind of video conversation with people either through an app or through something like Zoom. And I find that's probably a really easy way to quickly filter out people who you obviously are not going to be interested in. Because like you're saying, people with reprehensible views, people who maybe are sharing way too much, and that might be a deal breaker, are going to exhibit those traits within the first 15, 20 minutes. And the benefit of video, obviously, is like you can back out at any time and they don't know where you live. They don't have any of your personal information to utilize against you if needed.
Yeah, like definitely recommend that. And I think as I'm starting to get back into dating, that's something that I want to figure out myself, because I usually have guys who are like, yeah, let's meet up at this like seedy like coffee shop that's by a back alley. And it's like, I don't know if I'm ready.
It's by the back alley. Everyone knows the back alley.
I don't know if I'm ready to go down a back alley and like knock on a door 3 times and give a password to go on this date. But I definitely recommend that for a lot of partners. And that is something that I used to do, right? Where I'm like, okay, let me have a telephone conversation with this person or have a video chat with this person too. I think sometimes you have to be careful with those, right? Because it's kind of like a Zoom bombing situation where you log on and I've had clients and peers who said like, yeah, I logged on, like we were FaceTiming and like all of a sudden I was met with like somebody's like hairy asshole or penis. And, that's not what it was funny, but it wasn't what I was bargaining for when I logged in. But that tells you everything you need to know before you agree to go out with somebody. So yeah, definitely something that I'm going to be exploring going forward.
Wow, hairy asshole. That's new. That's the first time I've heard about something like that.
People are interesting.
Was it at least clean? I don't
did
need an
hear a
answer to that,
story
please.
where it was not, and it was very embarrassing for both of them because he did not know it wasn't clean.
I'm
So
just thinking of a story Naomi shared when she was dating in like late 2020, early 2021, of a guy who invited her to his apartment and was like, I'll cook you steaks. And he cooked a steak and cooked it like kind of, you said it was kind of rare.
it was like
Well,
super bloody, like super
yeah.
bloody.
And he's like, oh, that isn't done, and threw it in the trash. And then they went on a walk, and he like picked up his dog's poop, went on the walk, and then they get back to the house, and he starts picking like pieces of steak out of the trash and eating it, having not washed his hands.
Oh
And
my
it's like
God.
the audacity.
Oh my God, Naomi, I'm so sorry for you.
It's okay. It's okay. I just cry about it sometimes at night. I'm just kidding.
I once went out with a guy who told me, and he had funky breath, which I think was very important in like the story, but he told me that, come on, girl, you can sleep with me without a condom. We don't need that. The cure to AIDS is to drink your urine. So make of that story like what you want.
What?
That is, they don't want you to know the secret. The pharmaceutical industry would go bankrupt.
Well, why would he say the cure to AIDS? Like, why couldn't he just be like, the cure to chlamydia is drinking? Like, why did he have to jump so far?
I mean, I feel like people tell on themselves a lot when they're like talking to a therapist. And so I feel like that was him telling me he believed he cured himself from AIDS, and probably that's why his breath was so funky. Maybe even that's a part of his regular diet, drinking urine to keep the AIDS low. I don't know.
Every day he sits down on the toilet, he gets a cup of pee, he drinks it first thing in the morning. No coffee, no water, just that. Yeah.
It's a very interesting morning routine, right?
Did you say that was your worst dating experience? Tell me your worst dating experience.
Oh God, like I was just talking with my sister the other night, and I ended up meeting this guy. He was really cute. He's a local comedian. I won't name any names,
Call him out.
but we were at this bar and my friends were there. His friend was there. They were like, let us give you a ride back to your car. Because my friend had driven us to, I don't know, whatever we were doing. It was like early 20s, like shenanigans. I don't know. And there wasn't enough room in the car, so I ended up having to lay across the three people in the back seat. My head was in one of my friend's lap. My torso was in another friend's lap, and then my butt was in his lap. And it's a sedan. It's a pretty small car. And he goes to dry hump my butt very audibly, there was moaning. And my friend, my head was in her lap. She said that I turned to her very awkwardly, and she's like, the only thing that she could do was just pat me on the head. And then the best part was that I go to my sister's wedding, right? Some months later, and he is there with the guy who gave us a ride, and they're apparently friends of my brother-in-law. So I spent most of the wedding trying to dodge him. And my sister's like, why are you acting so awkward? And I'm like, oh, I'll tell you later. That was probably the worst of it. And I have a friend who brings it up to this day. Remember your head was in my lap and that guy was dry humping your butt?
Yes, I do remember that.
That is not an experience I will forget.
I can't believe you would call out local Arizona comedian Coyote Chris like that. Boy. Or is it Saguaro Jack? One of the two famous Arizona comedians. I don't know.
It's funny because the reason this story came up was I got an email because he was hosting something recently, and it just popped up in my email for some group that was and featuring blah 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 blah, who will be hosting this, and it was a big picture of his face. And so I sent it to my your brother-in-law, like, remember your friend tried to dry hump me in the back of the car? Well, he didn't try, he did. He did.
God. That is probably one of the worst ones I've ever heard. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, like that. And I had one where a guy, like, he took me out to coffee and he started this life story, like telling his life story from like the age of 11 to his like gastric bypass. And then he started planning our weddings. Like, so if we got married, who would be your maid of honor? And I literally just signed on to get a venti green tea. That's all I wanted today. So that was the worst one until that. So yeah.
You know, a lot of commentators in the media like to make fun of millennials and Zoomers for our coffee consumption habits, and they're like, you'd have homes if you weren't spending, $6 a day on drinks and fancy frivolities like avocado toast. And maybe the people are doing this in lieu of going out on horrible dates, right? It's like you get your avocado toast, you get your venti green tea, and you don't have any of the like emotional baggage that comes with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I've thought too about like, maybe I should just like post up at like Starbucks and like have people pay for my drink and they could just tell me their life story. And, this guy, he was like, so I have this like gastric bypass and I have these scars. It's not going to be a problem. Right? And I'm like, this one, what are we doing? Like, but I'm like, I feel like I'm good with like awkward moments. So I think that I should like really start a business in like addressing people's awkward moments, and they just get me coffee and avocado toast.
Maybe that's a little lower than your current hourly rate, though.
It might be, maybe. Like I think I can like at least go down to like maybe $25 like per hour, per awkward hour. Like so that's
five-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah. An hour. Yeah.
My coffee for the day.
So we talked about your worst. What is your best dating experience? Like best first date experience?
Oh God, have I had one?
Oh no.
You're like, if I had a good one, I'd be married by now.
Yeah, you know what? I went out with this guy who drives pedicabs. Do you guys know what those are?
Yeah,
Yeah, they're like the little like bikes that are strapped to like seats and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So he had this pedicab business. It was the most fascinating thing. There's like a whole pedicab culture. And he didn't drive, right? Because he like biked everywhere, right? But he like, I went out on like a couple dates with him and he was so sweet. He did put it out there like, hey, I'm just looking for a hookup or a friendship. And I was curious and I was like, I want to date a pedicab driver for a moment. Like this was like in my late 20s. And like he like was the best date ever. He provided the best conversations ever. He like took me to some of his like favorite like restaurants around the valley, which I hadn't heard of. And he would tell me like, I eat like a bear of a man. And so like there's certain things that I don't have the tolerance for. So anything that has shells you can have that I can't just stuff in my mouth. I thought that was really sweet. And that is sad that is my best dating experience. But I got lobster because he did not know how to open lobster. So,
Fair enough.
There was
Fair enough.
Yeah. That was he was a nice guy. He went back to pedicabbing, and I think Seattle is where like the pedicabbers are, and they come here seasonally. So he went back to Seattle to like, because the season passed and I never heard from him again. But he was definitely one of the most interesting dates, and he wasn't creepy too, which I would have expected him to be creepy.
Yeah.
He was not.
I assume if you operate a business where like all you can do is like talk to people as you're driving them at 5 miles an hour down a road, like you got to develop some basic conversational skills.
Yeah, great people skills. I definitely think that, I would use him as kind of like the bar for communication, because he was very upfront about like what he wanted. And we talked about it, and he was like, married as a fetus and I'm divorced and I'm like looking to have fun. But like nothing ever like came out of that for me, but a really good like friendship for a few days. But that guy was very honest in what he wanted. And he was such a gentleman, I will say. Very friendly, right? Like if more guys could communicate like that, the world would be a better place, I think.
Yes, I
Oh
definitely
my
agree.
God. I'm willing to like drop my job right now and we'll just open up like a dating workshop for men. But instead of like sitting them down and showing them PowerPoints, we just assign them a pedicab route and they have to learn how to communicate with people. So we collect all their money and they pay us in turn for the privilege of us facilitating the ability to communicate with a wide range of individuals.
We
Exactly.
lost.
Listen,
Go ahead.
I'm advocating for more people to go out with a pedicab driver. They are great conversationalists. They are super fun. They always have a really great playlist, right?
Oh,
And like
okay.
they know the city really well. They know about like certain things that you wouldn't know like every day about the city. They know like, okay, this place has the best tacos, right? Because they've been everywhere. So I'm definitely advocating for pedicab drivers, guys.
I am assuming, however, their knowledge is limited to specific things like Roosevelt Row, a lot of broken glass over there. Man, where I keep getting blown tires.
You need to know that, right? Like, I don't want to have to replace my tires, right? Like,
There you go. There's pros and cons to dating everyone. So, you mentioned some of your dating stories. What are some non-negotiables for dating for you? Obviously, you mentioned communication and intimacy and things of that sort, because that's something that people come to you and talk about. What else is on that list?
I feel for me, the obvious answer is hygiene. Like, I'm going to need you to wash like all parts of your body, which interestingly enough, like a lot of women that come to me, one of the things that kind of like takes them out of the mood when, they're getting ready to have sex with their partner is if it doesn't smell right in the room. Right. So that is a very big component, right?
Okay, yeah.
I just need, to know that there's some kind of washing. Um, Communication, because yeah, like I spend like most of my time talking to people all day. And so yeah, conversation is definitely a big love language, if you will, for me, like being able to communicate clearly and also like having a sense of humor. I don't think everything needs to be like super serious all the time. I think that's the thing that people get wrong about therapists is that we're like, try and like, oh, how may I help you with this today? No, like we like a good laugh too. I think that, like I said, like anybody that has no games in their dating profile is automatically getting the block. Like maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem. I'm the one who's playing games with that. I don't know. And I think too, like somebody who is okay with and secure in the fact that, I am me, right? Like I do have like my foot in like different, like dip my toe in like different ponds occasionally with all the things that I do in terms of like political activism and being a therapist and being here, there, and everywhere. And I think I need somebody who is going to be understanding of that and not try to dim my light. But I'm also willing to kind of compromise on those things too, because I recognize to have a successful relationship, time is going to be a part of that. So I definitely am willing to prioritize the time for a partnership too. So I don't know, like I'm kind of weird about all of that, but I am definitely I'm not the kind of person who's like, he needs to have this career. Like, ideally, I would like him to at least have a job since I have a job, right? It's not like a monetary requirement, but yeah, like I'm not that detailed. And I don't think a lot of people's asks are really that detailed. I think that's just kind of like a myth of like the dating world in terms of like your expectations are too high. Like, I'm asking for people to wash their ass. That is like, the bar is on the floor.
No, I love that. Like, I love when like people are talking about their relationship. They're like, "Oh, my boyfriend found this like great Airbnb for us to go to and like planned this weekend for us." And I was like, "Oh, so the bare minimum. You're
Yeah.
describing bare minimum."
Yeah, which I saw somebody that I follow online, and he was like, these girls want us to get their nails done on the first date. And I'm like, who is this? Like, that is not a thing, right? Like a girl expecting you to maybe have a job, sure, right? Like that's not easy to come by, or to, display that you smell good because you've washed parts of your body. That's really what we want at this point.
We don't care if you
Like,
have a car. You can be a pedicabber. We don't care at this point.
yeah, like I'm over here dating pedicabbers and, just like getting my whole life, right? So, definitely, like, I don't think that my expectations are unrealistic. And I don't think that most people's expectations that I've talked to are unrealistic.
I would definitely say that like the vast majority of the people that like you see on social media and stuff, like the heterosexual men are like, oh well, women they want all these things and they want you to like pay for everything, and it just feeding into that like toxic like incel culture of just like, oh, women are shitty and you're never gonna date any of them kind of situation.
Oh yeah, I'm looking at dudes talking about like, women just want us to pay for everything. And I was like, and I'm sitting there looking and knowing their story, and I'm like, you have not had stable employment since I met you. So what women are asking you to pay their rent? You need me to help you pay your rent.
A therapist right there.
Oh golly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is, the flip side of social media for like all the good it can do in like teaching women to recognize signs of domestic abuse and like to set clear expectations for relationships. It also can, one person ranting about one bad experience they may or may not have had can go viral, and suddenly tens of thousands of people are like, oh, I can't believe all women are exactly like this.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know how you game the algorithm such that you can allow one of those things to rise to the top and the other to not, because obviously they accomplish very, very different things. And I would argue that that's a very gendered thing where, these sorts of media that are meant to educate tend to filter down to women, and the forms of media that tend to demonize tend to filter down to men.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, there's a lot of like crazy dating myths out there about Black women that really feed into a lot of these racist tropes, right? And it's really disheartening to hear it coming from these self-proclaimed dating gurus who are usually like BIPOC men, right? And like their chorus of like pick me's who are like, yeah, that's what they do, right? And it's like, no, like, you know, these whole like scenarios where we try to make Black women seem like they're unattractive or that they have to lower their standards. Like, how dare you ask for a guy to have a job when you're like not married and you're over 35? Like, that seems like responsible dating to me, right? Like, but I think that, for Black women, we're so often told that we don't deserve to have the partners that we want, and that what we're asking for is too much, right? And I think that we really need to change that narrative, right? And it's got to start with, some of these like videos, like we need to stop like paying attention to them, or paying attention to these guys who are like dating gurus and they're not married and they're over 35, right? Like, so it's not that, Black women who are unmarried and over 35 are a problem, right? You're not married and you're over 35. So what's your problem then, if we're using that scenario?
Yeah.
But yeah, like that makes dating really complicated too for Black women, in feeling like dating society and culture has told us already that we're unattractive and that whatever we want is too much.
Joel and I both watched the movie You People with Eddie Murphy and Jonah Hill, and we have varying responses about how much we liked it. Joel didn't like it. I loved it, but I don't know if you're familiar with this film, but it's pretty new. It was produced and written by Jonah Hill, and I just like I thought I had a basic understanding of like what it was like to date as a Black woman in this country, but apparently I had no fucking idea. Which, I'm a white woman. I don't expect to have any idea, you know what I mean? Unless I'm properly educated. And this movie wasn't proper education, but it gave like a good sense of what it is like to date, have an interracial relationship in this modern day. And one of the biggest things that it portrayed was, obviously there was like a lot of like over exaggerate, well, I wouldn't say over exaggeration, but for the source of the media that was being portrayed, it had what I felt like it was an over exaggeration of some themes. And one of them was just the fact that this like woman walked into her fiance's parents' house, and right away she had a normal sounding name, and they were like trying to make it sound more ethnic, if you will, to make it seem like they had a better understanding of what she was all about. And she was like, no, it's like really simple, like it's just 2 syllables or whatever, like this is all it is. And they're like trying to make it sound, and then like the hair and touching the hair, and I was just always told you don't touch any woman's hair, like no matter what. And obviously there's just it was just it I had no idea. I had no idea.
Oh yeah, like I think that's also something that you encounter in dating profiles, where people like talk about like their ideal woman, and you start to figure out like this is not a Black woman, right?
Yeah.
Like that's very like, you know, very clear, and you know, these dudes are just not saying it, right? Or even dating, you know, not only just being a Black person or Black woman, but being a Black woman that exists in a larger body too, right? Because we know that a lot of fat phobia is steeped in racism, right? We know that BMI is like full of shit, and you know, it was used, you know, by racists to make Black women feel like their body years were less superior to white women's at the time, right? And so when people start describing, you know, things that, you know, do not sound like Black women, like no hair weaves, no curly hair, like no natural hair, it's like, okay, like what are we doing, right? And you know, I think that Black women, when we're dating, we have to look at a profile to see like, you know, is this guy even into Black women? Like I think we have kind of like you know, the LGBTQ community talks about like gaydar, you know, that was really big in like the 90s. Like Black women have had to develop like a radar in terms of like, this guy is not into Black women, I'm not going to swipe on this. And we just, there are tells, you know, that, you know, we're able to kind of decipher that quick, but that kind of like limits the dating pool a lot too.
Yeah.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, we talked about a conservative dating app that popped up a couple of months ago. I don't know if you heard about it. It's called The Right Stuff. And the idea was it was like conservatives only have a platform now. And the utility for that is questionable, but you could argue it's useful in places like Los Angeles or New York, where like there's small conservative populations in a much larger pool of mostly liberal individuals. And so having an ability to like filter out all the noise and focus on exactly what you want could be helpful. And like, I don't know. I could see the same thing sort of working for, you know, a dating platform where it's, you know, people who aren't necessarily prejudiced, but even like discussing and trying to envision what that would look like would be very difficult. It's like, you know, on OkCupid putting up, I'm not a racist in my profile and having that as a banner. But maybe the existing ones like support a BLM kind of fill that void.
Well, and I think that they're like the whole niche dating market is an interesting one too. Like I just saw a couple months ago that there is one for like fat people, right? And dating in like fat bodies, right? Which you know, that could be an interesting one, but that can also be a tool that somebody uses to kind of fetishize a fat person too. So it's kind of like a gamble, right? Or if you had like a dating app, like a Black People Meet, right? Which I've been on Black People Meet, and I felt like it wasn't as developed years ago. It was kind of like really hard to figure out. I don't know if they've kind of like changed it. But, you know, also too, like that, you know, kind of like creates a bit of a target too, in terms of like, if I am, you know, really racist, I'm going to go to this dating app and, you know, target a bunch of like Black folks, right? And so And we can say like that wouldn't happen, but in these times, right, where people are targeting Black and brown bodies or targeting like queer bodies, right, or fat bodies in certain instances, that safety thing becomes a bit of an issue too, right? But yeah, I definitely understand it. Like, I'm not opposed to like a conservative dating app. Like, sure, like if you want to meet another conservative partner, then okay, right? I definitely do not swipe on guys who are very conservative, because I'm not a very conservative person. So I totally get that. But I feel like these, like, even though we create these like niche dating apps, it's still the same people on every app. Still the same people. Like, I could be on the like OK Cupid and then like eHarmony, and people think like if I pay for it, it'll be serious. But it's the same people that were on OK Cupid. They just paid for it. So it's just really weird.
Yeah, I guess my big issue with specialty dating apps is I feel, to your point, that they help reinforce kind of existing prejudices. And it's this whole problem where these bigger dating apps, the algorithms are trying to find someone who's similar to you. And they, try to filter through all the information you've given them. Even OkCupid allows you to like answer hundreds of questions, which can allow them to like create a more precise match. But the idea is the best person for you in a relationship is someone who has the most similar qualities to you. I don't necessarily know if that's true. And I feel that reinforces a lot of like existing prejudices and social boundaries, where it's like, well, we're only going to filter to people who have a similar income to you. We're only going to filter to people who have similar life experiences to you. We're going to filter to people who have similar media consumption to you. And I think there's plenty of people out there who may be perfectly happy in an interracial relationship, who, due to like how the algorithms sort things, are just never going to have the opportunity to explore that.
I had an energy healer, which is very like hippie social worker of me, but I had an energy healer one time tell me that I would probably match up with a super hyper masculine guy. And I was like, that's really weird. And she was like, it's just kind of like your energy. You need somebody who's kind of like, different, and somebody who's going to challenge you in different ways. And I've always been like interested in that too. And especially looking at like the partnerships around me. Like, my parents have been married for years, right? They are not alike at all. Right? Like, my dad is the fun one and my mom is kind of like the perfectionist, like stick in the mud sometimes, but it's worked for them, right? They challenge each other in different ways, right? And they've learned a lot from each other. It's the same thing I think too with my brother-in-law and my sister, right? When my sister started dating my brother-in-law, we were kind of like, this is really different from what she typically goes for. But it was somebody who challenged her, and challenged her in different ways. She challenged him too. And it's been amazing to see them grow together. And so I definitely think that, if you go a little bit too niche, you might be missing out on some people who could really be your match, right? Like, I don't think that we need to find somebody who is like the exact same as us to have like a successful partnership. That could be kind of a detriment in some ways.
I may argue that the most hyper masculine a person can be is having legs like tree trunks and running their own successful pedal cab business. But missed opportunities.
You know what? If she had told me that right around 28 when I went out with that guy, like, life could be different now. I could like be like the queen of like the pedicab fortune over here, right? But thus I was young and I missed out on an opportunity.
Don't live with regret. Just move to Seattle.
Yeah. He's out there somewhere. I just got to find him.
Lindsay, we don't want to keep you all day, so I want to start moving towards a wrap up. And I guess the first question I have as we get towards the end is, are there any particularly happy forms of media that you enjoy? Any particular, favorite movies, films, music, etc.?
So in terms of like, are we talking about like genre? Or are we talking about like specifics?
We can talk about romantic specifically, but if there's other things, one big theme that we've tried to return to over and over again the last 2 years is the world sucks, and our audience might need recommendations for things that can distract them from how bad the world is.
Yes. So I have actually started picking up romance novels. I actually had like another person who read my cards. I really am sounding like the hippie social worker. I apologize. Who told me that in order to like find romantic love, I needed to be able to visualize it and see it. And so I've been drawn to like romance novels, right? Not always like the healthiest relationship dynamics in those, but you got to be careful. But my mom was like, and her sisters, they loved like those little $5 like Harlequin romance novels, right? And so I've been like geared towards those, or I'll find like relationship or like romantic books that where the characters are like BIPOC or queer, which is kind of like a different and like refreshing take on like love that we don't really see. I think there's a book that I just read. It's called 7 Days in June, and I'm blanking on the author. I think it's Tia Williams. That's a really fun one that I didn't expect. Really enjoyed that. I think in terms of like movies, so you would think that I would be drawn towards romantic movies, but I'm really drawn towards like true crime and like horror movies these days for my fun. Like my favorite genre of movies is actually like the Nightmare on Elm Street movie series, just from like a trauma therapist perspective, or like Chucky and like the Paranormal Activity movies, but it's purely from like a nerdy trauma therapist reason that I won't go into because that would probably be boring.
I'm just imagining you like coming home after like a really like hard day and just settling down with a Chucky movie to like really ease you into the nighttime routine. Most people would be like sitting at the edge of their seats and just like, and you're just like,
My family knows, like, if they want to watch like true crime, they call me for like their recommendations. And I got like 5 shows that I'm actively watching on the ID network that I'm like, oh my God, you got to watch this one. This shit's really crazy. But I don't know. They call me when I was like sick with COVID. I just watched a whole bunch of like ID network and like felt like, oh, this is peaceful. I feel great already. I'm crossing my fingers for Beyonce tickets. That's been like what I've been really trying to put energy into. But my practice actually does have a Spotify playlist that I'm loving, and I need to kind of like add some more songs to. And it's just songs to make you dance or make you feel at peace or at ease. So looking into, recurating that because I think that we all want to dance and like have fun after like 3 years and like pandemic hell. So
that is very true. Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah,
I was just thinking about my love of Mindhunter on Netflix as you were talking about true crime. Have you seen that?
That is in my queue to watch. Actually, I just got a new TV. So now I can watch like Netflix without abandon now, like while I'm doing my notes in my office. And that is something that I want to watch next.
I think what's interesting about Mindhunter is, one, it's very well produced. I think David Fincher did most of the episodes. So like the direction and the scene composition is just chef's kiss. But there's also this theme of the main character digging into the psychology of serial killers and that impacting his relationship with his girlfriend at the time, and sort of the lessons he's taking from these serial killers and how he like incorporates that into his relationship is both funny and like scary at different points.
That's really interesting. Like as a trauma therapist, there's like this belief in like energy shifts, right? And so when we're working with clients, we sometimes take on the energy from their trauma. And I've often, like, my parents think that like I'm not a therapist. They think I'm like in here doing some kind of like weird witchcraft or something like that. Like my dad is like, oh my God, I don't know. Like that sounds like the devil there. They're very Southern Baptist people. So therapy is like an interesting one for them. But my parents claim that they can see a difference when I do like a regular talk therapy session versus like an EMDR and brain spotting session. And I've often wondered, like, I wonder if they're seeing the energy shift that people talk about with those kinds of things. So I don't know.
Therapy is literally like rewiring people's brains. I'd argue it's a form of hypnotism / magic. Like, that's not how we talk about it, but there's definitely, there's a there.
My dad told me I do this modality, brain spotting, and he told my niece, like, she goes in and she stabs people's brain. And I'm like, fair. It's not what I do, but like, I do penetrate the brain deeply with some like psychological things.
And ever since then, he's just looked up to you. She's like, Auntie Lindsay, don't stab me in the brain.
I feel that
office suspicious. Like, what's she doing?
That's a good opportunity for like visual aids in your work where you're like, so here's what we're going to be doing today. And you like pull out like a squishy brain and you're like, we're taking out all the bad thoughts.
I do actually have a wand that I use for brain spotting. And so for the longest time, my niece thought that I'd go in through people's nose and just like stab them with the wand. So I don't know.
Brother, I don't know if we're going to end on a better anecdote than that. Lindsay, before we wrap up, are there any good charities or groups that you think deserve some more attention and love that our viewers can pay attention to?
Yes, the Highland Project, which I'm actually in their cohort, they do, they help Black women to kind of like reinvest in themselves and focus on building like generational wealth. And not from a purely like capitalist standpoint too, in terms like wealth in terms of like resource, which I am loving and definitely want to see them stay around for a future of like generations. I also think the Loveland Foundation, which pays for Black women to go to therapy for free. They pay for about like 4 to 6 sessions. I certainly send a lot of clients their way so they can get like a Loveland Foundation grant to help them on their therapy journey. Of course, like Planned Parenthood. My sister was like the chair of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Arizona for a long time. And really like that fight for reproductive justice and reproductive rights is important. And then on that same token, birth workers of color in Arizona, right? Because as abortion access is restricted, right, we need to invest in culturally sound birth workers, right? That, kind of help us along in that experience, especially when like Black and Indigenous women or Black and Indigenous people who give birth, their mortality rates are like in the tank. And, having a place where abortion is so restricted will definitely impact our health and wellness. So we got to invest in our like Black birth workers and birth workers of color.
Right. No, I think those are great recs. And if our listeners like what they're hearing from you, and I don't know why they wouldn't, where can they find you online?
So I am at Therapy Luv at most of the socials, at least Instagram and Facebook. And Therapy Luv, all one word. Love is spelled L-U-V. My Twitter is love, the number 2 disrupt, and love is like L-U-V. And I believe my like Instagram is like, but if you go to my website, it links up to all of my socials. So my website is therapyluv.com. You get all my socials and access to that Spotify playlist.
I love that. I was just stalking your Instagram as you were bringing that up. I was like, oh.
I've got a really great team who works with me and, when I wake up at 2 in the morning and I'm like, hey guys, what if we do this? They're very patient with me. So
Lindsay, go to sleep.
Yeah, they're like, go to sleep. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Well, at a better time tomorrow.
I love that. Okay, well, I would like to say personally, thank you so much for letting us interview you. You are so incredible. You sound so incredible as a human, and I really appreciate all the work that you're doing and everything you're advocating for. So personally, thank you so much. Joel,
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Joel, would you like to wrap up this episode?
Pirate Mindhunter. Don't get your Netflix subscription, guys. They're not a great company, but do watch Mindhunter in some form.
Okay, awesome. Awesome way to end. Thank you, Joel.
We have many thanks for the use of our theme music, which is the song Drop by Ketsa. You can find more of their music online at ketsa.uk. You can also find Date These Guys online on Twitter and Instagram at Date These Guys, or visit our website at datetheseguys.org. If you have questions you'd like us to discuss on the podcast or marriage proposals for either of us, shoot us an email at datetheseguys@gmail.com.